You are mine. I am yours. Lakota warrior's forbidden love with the woman who saved him. At dawn, the land was quiet in a way that felt watchful. The grass moved softly under a pale sky, and the air carried the smell of earth and dry leaves. A man lay hidden among the tall grass, his breathing shallow and uneven. He was a Lakota warrior, though no one nearby knew his name. His strength, once steady and sure, had faded after a long night of pain and exhaustion. He had been separated from his people during a clash, far from any safe camp. Now, alone and weak, he drifted between sleep and waking, unsure if the sun rising above him would be his last. Not far away, a woman walked carefully along the edge of the plain. She carried a small basket filled with herbs and roots she gathered each morning. Her life had taught her to move quietly and observe everything. She lived on the border between worlds, never fully belonging to either. The settlement she came from was small, and she kept to herself. People there whispered about her kindness and her solitude. She had learned that silence could be safer than words. As she stepped through the grass, she noticed something unusual. A broken line in the plants, as if someone had passed through in a hurry. She stopped. Her heart beat faster, not from fear alone, but from instinct. She followed the trail slowly, ready to turn back if danger appeared. Then she saw him. At first she thought he was already gone. He lay still, his dark hair spread across the ground, his face pale with strain. His clothing marked him as Lakota, a people often spoken of with suspicion and distance by those in her settlement. Helping him would bring trouble. Ignoring him would be easier. She stood frozen between these two choices, feeling the weight of them press on her chest. She knelt beside him and listened. There it was, a faint breath, soft but real. He was alive. In that moment, her decision was made. She did not think of rules or warnings. She thought only of the person before her, someone's son, someone who had lived and hoped just as she had. Carefully, she gave him water, letting it touch his lips. His eyes opened briefly, dark and unfocused, then closed again. He did not speak, but his breath steadied slightly. Getting him to safety was not easy. He was tall and heavy, and her strength was limited. Still, she found a way. Using a small hand cart she had hidden nearby, she moved him slowly, stopping often to rest. Every sound made her tense. She knew that if anyone saw her, questions would follow. Questions she could not answer without putting both their lives at risk. She brought him to a small shelter she kept hidden near a grove of trees. It was a place she used during storms or when she needed to be alone. Inside it was simple but clean. She laid him down gently and began tending to him with the skills she had learned over years of caring for herself. The days that followed blended together. She cleaned his wounds, gave him water and food when he could swallow, and watched him closely. At times his breathing grew weak, and she feared she had waited too long. At other moments he stirred, his brow tightening as if caught in a dream. She spoke softly to him, though she did not know if he could hear her. Her words were simple, meant more to calm herself than anything else. When he finally woke fully, it was with confusion and caution. His eyes moved around the shelter, taking in the unfamiliar space. His hand tensed as if reaching for something that was not there. She stepped back to give him space, raising her hands to show she meant no harm. They did not share a language. Still, understanding found its way between them. She pointed to herself, then to him, then to the water she offered. He watched her carefully, measuring her intentions. Slowly, he accepted the cup and drank. That small act was the first thread of trust. Over the next few days he grew stronger. Sitting up became possible. Then standing, though only for a short time, he moved with quiet grace, even in weakness, and carried himself with a dignity that made her pause. She saw that he was not just a survivor, but someone shaped by responsibility and loss. They communicated through gestures and expressions. She showed him how to rest, how to eat the soft food she prepared. He nodded in thanks, touching his chest in a gesture she came to understand as gratitude. At night, when the world outside grew dark and still, they shared the quiet. No words passed between them, but the silence felt full, not empty. Still, Danger lingered close. She listened carefully for voices or footsteps. She knew others searched the land, some from her world, some from his. Either could bring an end to this fragile peace. Each morning she wondered if it would be the day she would have to send him away, even if he was not ready. As he healed, he began to help in small ways, gathering water or arranging the space so it was easier for her to move. Their shared routine became a kind of language of its own. She found herself smiling more, feeling a warmth she had not known in years. He watched her with a calm attention, as if memorizing her presence. Yet beneath the growing closeness was fear. She knew their bond was not allowed by the world outside this shelter. He belonged to a people fighting to protect their way of life. She belonged nowhere fully, yet still carried the weight of her origin. What they shared existed only in this hidden space, balanced on borrowed time. One evening, as the light faded, she sat by the doorway and looked out at the land. He sat nearby, his posture relaxed but alert. The wind moved through the trees, carrying distant sounds she could not place. She felt the truth settle in her heart. Saving him had changed her life, and perhaps his as well. Whatever came next, this moment could not be undone. He followed her gaze and then looked back at her. In his eyes she saw something steady and sincere, a recognition that went beyond words. They were two people brought together by chance, held by kindness, and tested by a world that would not understand. As night fell, the shelter filled with a quiet promise. Part one of their story did not end with certainty or safety, but with hope. Fragile, real, and powerful enough to keep them both going. The days moved forward slowly, marked by small changes that felt important to both of them. Morning light entered the shelter through the narrow opening, and with it came the sound of birds and the soft movement of wind through the trees. The woman woke early, as she always did, and checked on the man before anything else. Each day his breathing sounded stronger. The tight lines of pain on his face began to ease. The weakness still followed him like a shadow. At first he spoke very little, not because he did not want to, but because words did not come easily between them. His language and hers were different, shaped by separate worlds. Yet silence no longer felt awkward. It became something they shared, a space where understanding slowly grew. She showed him how to sit near the doorway to feel the fresh air without straining himself. He watched her closely as she worked, learning her routines. When she prepared food, he observed the way her hands moved, careful, practiced, gentle. In return, he offered small signs of thanks, a nod, a quiet look of respect. These moments, though simple, carried meaning. There were times when fear returned. When distant sounds reached the shelter, voices carried by the wind or the echo of movement across the land, both of them grew still. The woman's heart would race as she listened, wondering who might be nearby. The man's posture changed in those moments, his alertness sharpening. Even weakened, he remained aware of danger. They shared these tense pauses without speaking, united by the same unspoken worry. As his strength returned, he began helping her more. He gathered water carefully, leaning on a stick she had given him for support. He cleaned the area around the shelter, making sure no signs were left that might draw attention. His movements were quiet and thoughtful, as if he understood how much safety mattered here. She noticed how he respected the land. He never took more than needed, and always paused, as if offering silent thanks. Watching him, she felt something shift inside her. She had grown up hearing only one side of stories about people like him. Now, seeing his care and patience, those old ideas began to fade. One afternoon, while the sun was high, she showed him a small collection of herbs drying near the shelter. She pointed to each one, explaining their use with gestures and simple words. He listened closely, repeating some of the words slowly, testing their sound. She smiled at his effort, and for the first time laughter found its way into the space between them. Soft, unexpected, and warm. He began sharing pieces of himself in the only way he could. He drew symbols in the dirt outside the shelter, simple shapes that told stories of his people, of wide skies and shared fires. She watched, captivated. even when she did not fully understand. What mattered was the meaning behind his actions, the desire to be seen and known. At night, the shelter felt smaller, filled with the quiet weight of closeness. They sat across from each other, the fire between them casting gentle light on their faces. Shadows moved along the walls, and the world beyond seemed far away. In these moments, they were not divided by language or origin. They were simply two people sharing time, warmth, and safety. Yet the woman could not forget the reality waiting outside. She knew this peace could not last forever. Patrols moved through the area, and whispers from nearby settlements spoke of rising tension. Each day he grew stronger brought both relief and fear. Strength meant survival, but it also meant departure. She began to notice the way he looked at her, not with demand or expectation, but with quiet respect. His gaze held gratitude, concern, and something deeper she was not ready to name. It unsettled her not because it was unwelcome, but because she knew how dangerous it was to feel such a connection. One evening, as she returned from gathering water, she stumbled on uneven ground. He reached her in an instant, steadying her before she could fall. Their hands touched, and for a brief moment, neither moved. The contact was simple, yet it carried a weight that made her breath catch. He released her quickly, as if aware of the line they stood near. That night, sleep came slowly. She lay awake listening to his breathing, steady and calm. Her thoughts wandered to questions without answers. What would happen when he left? Would he remember this place this time? Would she? The next day he surprised her by bringing back a small carving he had made from wood. It was rough but carefully shaped, a symbol she did not recognize. He offered it to her with both hands, his expression serious. She accepted it, understanding that this was a gift of meaning, not decoration. She pressed it to her chest in thanks, and his face softened. From that moment on, something changed. They became more aware of each other, of the space they shared. Every glance, every small gesture carried feeling. Yet neither crossed the boundary they both sensed. The world outside had drawn lines too deep to ignore. Still, in the quiet moments, hope found a way to exist. They spoke through shared work, through understanding looks, through the steady rhythm of days spent together. Each moment felt borrowed, precious, and fragile. As the days passed, signs of his readiness to leave became clearer. His steps grew surer. His posture regained its strength. He stood taller, no longer leaning on support. The woman watched this transformation with mixed emotions, pride, fear, and sadness all woven together. One afternoon he stood at the edge of the trees, looking out across the plains. She joined him, following his gaze. The land stretched wide and open, full of both promise and danger. She knew he was thinking of his people, of where he belonged. He turned to her, then placing a hand over his heart, and then gesturing toward her. The meaning was clear, even without words. She felt her eyes fill, but she did not look away. She nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth they both carried. The days on the plains began to feel heavier. Even though the warrior's strength was returning, the air carried a quiet tension that neither of them could ignore. Each morning the woman woke early, as she always did, to prepare food and check the shelter for safety. The man watched her quietly, noticing the care and skill in her movements. He had seen many people in his life, but none like her, so careful, so patient, so determined to protect life even in the face of danger. As he regained his strength, he wanted to do more than simply survive. He began helping with tasks around the shelter, arranging firewood and collecting clean water. Each small task gave him purpose and reminded him that even in this strange, quiet place, he still had a life to live. She watched him, grateful for his effort, but also aware of how quickly circumstances could change. The world outside the grove was not forgiving. Their bond grew, though still unspoken. They learned to understand each other through gestures, expressions, and small routines. When she handed him food, he would nod, pressing his hand to his chest in gratitude. When he worked near her, she would glance up and smile, feeling a warmth she had not experienced in years. Their connection was quiet, built slowly through shared experience and care. But danger always lingered. The warrior's presence, if discovered, would bring consequences for both of them. She remembered the stories from her village about outsiders and the fear that accompanied the unknown. The men and women in her settlement would not understand why she hid him. And the warrior's people, if they learned he had been seen by outsiders, might see her as a threat. Each sound in the distance made their hearts beat faster. Footsteps on the grass, the call of a bird, the rustle of leaves that might hide watchers. He began teaching her a few words from his language. Simple sounds, meant for basic understanding, like water, safe, and friend. She repeated them carefully, delighting in the challenge. He smiled when she said them correctly, a rare warmth breaking across his usually serious face. In return, she taught him words from her language. They laughed quietly at mistakes, feeling the walls between them start to fade. Evenings were the hardest. The sun would set slowly over the horizon, painting the sky in shades of red and gold. They would sit together by the fire, the warmth of the flames a comfort against the cold night. She often found herself thinking about the world beyond the trees, and he would gaze into the distance, as if measuring the space between this sanctuary and the home he had lost. One night, while the wind moved softly through the trees, the warrior spoke for the first time in a full sentence. His words were rough, broken by her inability to understand fully, but she could sense the meaning. He wanted to protect her, to stay by her side as long as he could. Her heart responded with a quiet certainty she could not name. She placed her hand gently on his, understanding his intention even if she could not grasp the words. Days became weeks. The man's health returned almost fully. He walked farther from the shelter, exploring the nearby woods under her watchful eye. He moved carefully, aware that each step could be dangerous if someone were nearby. Yet, in his careful movement, she saw a growing confidence. The same hands that once trembled while drinking water now carried bundles of wood, moved rocks, and helped her lift supplies. They began to share stories of the past, though slowly and in pieces. He drew shapes in the dirt to show her where he came from, describing life with his family, the wide plains, and the people who had raised him. She listened, fascinated, and responded with stories of her own life, of the quiet village, the lessons she had learned, and the loneliness she sometimes felt. Though they spoke little of love, their words carried the weight of respect, understanding, and connection. Yet the world outside did not wait. Rumors reached the woman's settlement of a warrior seen moving through the plains. The villagers were cautious and suspicious. Some prepared to search the woods, though no one suspected the hidden shelter. She knew it was only a matter of time before they would have to face the reality that staying together openly would be impossible. The warrior seemed to sense this, too. One afternoon, he stopped at the edge of the trees, staring out at the plains beyond. She approached him slowly, standing close but careful not to disturb him. He gestured with his hands, pointing to the distant horizon, and then back to the shelter. She understood immediately. The world beyond their hiding place demanded his return. That evening, they sat together in silence. The fire crackled gently, filling the small space with warmth. She could feel his tension, the struggle between duty to his people and the bond he had formed with her. She touched his arm lightly, offering comfort without words. He accepted it, leaning slightly into her gesture. They spent the night planning quietly. He would need to leave eventually, to return to his tribe and ensure his survival and honor. She knew she could not stop him, and he knew it too. Still, they made a silent promise to protect each other until that day came, to remain close in thought and memory. Over time, they developed small routines to strengthen their trust and connection. He would help her gather water at dawn. She would prepare the shelter and food, and together they would clean and organize the small space that had become their world. Each act, though simple, carried meaning. Every shared meal, every quiet glance, and every gesture built a bridge between their two lives. The warrior also began to teach her some basic skills he had learned on the plains. He showed her how to move quietly, how to watch the land for signs of danger, and how to protect herself if necessary. She learned quickly, appreciating the lessons not only for safety but for the bond it created. In these moments, respect for each other grew stronger. One afternoon, he brought her a small token, a piece of wood he had carved into a symbol. It was rough, unfinished, but meant to show gratitude and trust. She accepted it with care, pressing it to her chest as a silent promise of appreciation and connection. The gesture carried a weight that words could not, and both of them understood its importance. As the days passed, their relationship grew stronger. But the tension outside never disappeared. Every movement in the distance, every sound in the trees reminded them that their time together was fragile. Yet in the shelter there was a quiet peace. In those moments, they were not a warrior and a woman from different worlds. They were simply two people who had found each other against all odds. The warrior's strength was now nearly complete. He could walk easily, gather supplies, and even run short distances if needed. But with this regained strength came the understanding that the time to leave was approaching. He spent long hours staring into the horizon, thinking of his people, his past, and the future he would have to face. The woman, too, felt the approaching change. She did not speak of it, but her heart knew. One evening they sat together quietly, watching the sun sink below the horizon. The sky was painted with shades of orange, red, and purple. The warrior reached out his hand, touching hers gently. She felt a surge of emotion, knowing that the bond they shared could not be ignored, even if the world demanded separation.
He pressed a small hand-drawn symbol into her palm, a message of promise and connection, and she held it close.
As night fell, the shelter filled with quiet reflection. Both understood that the coming days would test their trust, courage, and hearts. Yet in that small space, for now, there was safety, warmth, and a growing connection that neither time nor distance could easily erase. Part 3 of their story captures the moment when understanding and care deepen, but the reality of the world outside begins to press in. They live between fear and hope, each day bringing them closer to both the joy of their connection and the inevitable challenge that awaits beyond the grove. The morning air was crisp and full of light, but there was a heaviness that pressed on both of them. The warrior stood near the edge of the shelter, his gaze fixed on the horizon. He had regained nearly all his strength now, and the wild plains beyond called to him. She watched him from inside, her hands busy with preparing food, but her mind was not on the work. She could see the weight of responsibility pressing on him, the struggle between duty and the bond they had formed. He turned to her then, eyes dark but steady, and gestured toward the distant plains. She understood immediately. He was thinking of leaving, of returning to his people, and he knew she could not come with him. Her heart tightened, but she did not speak. Words were unnecessary. Their lives had always been a language of gestures, glances, and small, meaningful actions. Over the following days they prepared quietly. They worked together to make sure the shelter was in order, that supplies were ready, and that the path ahead could be approached safely. Each act of preparation was careful and deliberate. He moved with purpose, but every now and then he would pause, watching her, as if memorizing the small details of her life. She noticed this and felt a mix of warmth and sadness. They both knew this was a time to hold on to the present, even as the future loomed near. The woman began teaching him more about her world. She showed him how to identify safe paths, which plants could be eaten without harm, and how to read the land for signs of others approaching. He absorbed it all with careful attention, his sharp mind remembering every lesson. In return, he continued teaching her the skills of the plains, how to move silently, how to notice distant sounds, how to be aware of the smallest details. They learned from each other, growing stronger together even as they both knew the coming separation was inevitable. One afternoon, while the sun was high and the shelter was quiet, he spoke more fully than he had in weeks. His words were simple, broken by the limits of their shared language, but the meaning was clear. He cared for her deeply. She felt a wave of emotion, understanding the honesty behind the effort it took him to speak. She placed her hand over his in response, a silent affirmation that she shared the same feeling. That night the wind carried distant sounds across the plains, voices and movement that were not their own. Both of them paused, listening carefully. Fear returned, sharp and immediate. She thought of the dangers that awaited them if discovery occurred. The warrior's people might see her as a threat, and her neighbors would not understand why she had hidden him. Yet even in the fear, their connection remained unbroken. They shared the same careful glances, the same quiet understanding, and the same determination to protect each other. As the days passed, it became clear that the time for his departure was near. He spent long hours standing outside the shelter looking toward the horizon, thinking of his people and the life that awaited him. She worked inside, preparing small gifts and tokens, simple items to remind him of their time together. A carved piece of wood, a small bundle of herbs, a note drawn in the dirt. They were gestures meant to carry her presence with him once he left. One evening, under a sky painted with gold and crimson, they shared a quiet moment by the fire. He reached for her hand, and she did not pull away. Their eyes met, and in that simple touch, 1,000 words were exchanged. Gratitude, love, fear, and the promise of remembrance. The world outside their grove demanded separation, but in that moment, nothing existed beyond the small circle of firelight and shared understanding. The next morning brought action. He gathered his belongings carefully, checking the paths they had cleared and the supplies they would need for the journey ahead. She assisted, moving quietly but deliberately, making sure everything was in order. Neither spoke much. Their actions were enough. Every movement was filled with meaning, every glance a silent conversation. Before leaving, he drew symbols in the dirt representing his people, his journey, and their bond. She knelt beside him, tracing her fingers lightly over the shapes, committing them to memory. It was a ritual, a way to carry a piece of each other into the uncertain future. He pressed his hand to his chest, and she did the same. In that gesture, they made a silent vow. No matter the distance, no matter the dangers ahead, they would remember and honor this time together. When the moment of departure arrived, he stepped toward the edge of the trees, pausing to look back. She stood at the entrance of the shelter, holding the carved wood and herbs close to her chest. Their eyes met, and for a brief heartbeat, time seemed to pause. He nodded once, a gesture of respect, love, and farewell. She responded with a gentle nod, holding back tears she refused to let show. He walked away slowly, each step measured, aware of the risks and responsibilities that awaited him. She watched until he disappeared into the tall grass, the horizon swallowing his figure. Then, only the wind and the distant call of birds filled the quiet. She felt the weight of absence immediately, but also a profound gratitude. Their connection had changed her life, and she knew it had changed him as well. In the days that followed, she continued her routines with careful attention. She prepared food, tended the shelter, and gathered supplies, but her mind often wandered to the warrior and the plains he now traveled. Each day she hoped he was safe, that he remembered their time together, and that somehow their bond could endure despite the distance. He, too, faced challenges. The journey back to his people was not easy. He moved cautiously, aware of the dangers that surrounded him and the lessons he had learned from her. Every step reminded him of the shelter, the firelight, and the quiet moments they had shared. The tokens she had given him were a constant presence, small reminders of trust, care, and love. As he approached the lands of his people, he began to think about how he would explain what had happened. How could he tell them about a woman who had saved him, who had cared for him when all others might have left him to die? He realized that words might not capture the full depth of their bond, but the memory of her would remain strong within him. Part 4 of their story shows the moment when love faces reality, when duty and world collide with desire and connection. Though separated by circumstances, their bond becomes a guiding force, shaping their choices and leaving a lasting imprint on both hearts. The warrior returns to his world and the woman continues hers, but their shared moments remain a quiet, powerful testament to the strength of trust, care, and forbidden love. The plains were quiet now, but the memory of the warrior lingered in the shelter like a warm shadow. The woman moved through her day with careful attention, yet every small action reminded her of him. She would straighten the blankets in the shelter, arrange the herbs, and prepare meals, and each movement seemed to echo the times they had spent together. The carved piece of wood he had given her rested on a small shelf, a constant presence, a symbol of the trust, care, and bond they had shared. Even though he was gone, their connection remained alive in memory. She often thought of the way he had watched the horizon, the careful strength of his movements, and the moments of quiet understanding that had passed between them. Each memory carried a warmth that eased her loneliness, yet also a bittersweet ache. She realized that love did not always mean being together physically. Sometimes it meant carrying someone in your heart and honoring the impact they had on your life. Far across the plains, the warrior moved carefully toward the lands of his people. Each step brought him closer to home, yet his thoughts never left her. He remembered the quiet mornings in the shelter, the small smiles they had exchanged, and the way her hands moved so gently yet confidently. Her courage had saved his life, but it also taught him something deeper about trust, patience, and the quiet strength that comes from caring for another. He faced challenges along the journey. The plains were vast and open, and dangers could appear at any moment. He moved cautiously, relying on the skills he had learned from her, to notice small signs in the land, to listen for distant sounds, and to move quietly to avoid attention. These lessons, though simple, had been life-saving. Yet even as he applied them, his mind returned again and again to the shelter, to the woman who had risked everything to save him. When he finally reached his people, he was greeted with curiosity and caution. Stories had spread of a warrior who had been absent, and questions were asked about where he had been and what had happened. He spoke carefully, sharing only what was necessary, but the lessons and strength he carried with him were clear to those who observed him. He moved differently now, not only with the strength of survival, but with the quiet confidence of someone who had learned the value of trust, loyalty, and care from another life. Meanwhile, the woman returned to her routines, but the world felt slightly different. She noticed the small beauty in everyday moments, the soft light of morning, the sound of wind moving through the grass, and the quiet rhythm of her own work. She carried the memory of him in a way that influenced her every action, guiding her decisions and giving her strength. It was as though a part of him had stayed behind in the shelter, woven into the fabric of her life. Months passed, and the seasons began to change. The wind grew cooler, and the earth shifted from the brightness of summer to the quiet tones of autumn. Each season brought memories of shared moments, the long afternoons by the fire, the silent communication through gestures, the small acts of kindness that had created a bond stronger than words. Even though distance separated them, the connection remained, a quiet thread linking two lives across time and space. One day, while gathering water, she came across a small carving left on a tree near the shelter. It was unmistakably his work, a simple symbol of a bird in flight. She smiled softly, feeling a rush of emotion. It was a message, a reminder that their bond had endured, even across the miles. She traced the shape with her fingers, pressing it to her heart as if it could carry her thoughts to him directly. At the same time, he worked among his people, sharing lessons and stories in ways he had never done before. Though he could not speak of everything, he carried the lessons of patience, observation, and quiet care that he had learned from her. In small ways, he honored her influence, applying the understanding he had gained to his life and actions. Those who observed him noticed a change, not just in his strength, but in the depth of his thought and the steadiness of his spirit. Letters could not pass between them, nor could they see each other openly, yet the bond they had formed did not weaken. Memory became their bridge, and the lessons they had shared continued to shape their lives. The woman found strength in her memories, allowing her to face challenges with courage and clarity. The warrior carried her presence silently, a guide and inspiration in decisions that required patience, wisdom, and restraint. Time continued to flow, and life moved forward in both their worlds. They met challenges, made decisions, and experienced moments of joy and sorrow, all while carrying the invisible thread of connection that had begun in the hidden shelter.
Their bond, born in a moment of vulnerability and trust, had become a guiding force, subtle, enduring, and unspoken.
As the years passed, the story of their connection remained a quiet presence in their hearts. They rarely spoke of it to others, but the impact was evident in the way they lived, the choices they made, and the care they showed to those around them. The lessons of trust, courage, and compassion had become part of who they were, and the memory of their shared moments remained as a light in their lives, guiding them through uncertainty. Even in separation, love persisted in its purest form. It was not about possession or proximity, but about respect, care, and the quiet promise of remembrance. Each carried the other in spirit, honoring the impact of those days when trust had saved a life and created a bond that could never be broken. In the shelter, the woman often paused to look at the carved symbols, the small reminders of the time they had shared. She thought of the warrior walking the plains, surviving, thriving, and carrying her memory. Each small act became a ritual of remembrance, a way to keep the bond alive. It reminded her that even when life demanded separation, love and care could endure beyond distance. The warrior, in his own world, would often pause and think of her. Her face, her gestures, her courage, all remained vivid in his mind. Even when faced with the responsibilities of his people and the challenges of the plains, he carried her influence with him. Her lessons had shaped him. Her trust had strengthened him, and her care had changed him. Part 5 of their story shows the quiet endurance of love. It is a story of connection that survives distance, challenges, and the demands of different worlds. Though separated physically, the warrior and the woman remain united in memory action and the subtle influence they have on each other's lives. Their story is proof that true connection can endure, shaping lives in ways that time, distance, and circumstance cannot erase. Theirs is a love that is not loud or celebrated, but deeply felt. A bond born of trust, compassion, and courage, carried quietly in the heart, teaching that even in the hardest of times, humanity and care can cross boundaries and leave a lasting legacy.